Welcome to Keep Hustling, where we are going past the why to get to the how. I'm your host, the always hustling Aaron Gordon, aka NY Risk Advisor, aka Mr. #Keep Hustling. In this podcast, we will be diving deep into the professional and personal successes of our guests to find out how they hustled through the most difficult times in their life and their development to achieve the success they've gotten to today. So buckle up for what hopes to be an amazing ride. And of course, now and always, keep hustling. Welcome to Keep Hustling with my guest, Jeff Douglas. Thank you for being here, Jeff.
Thanks for having me.
It's a dream to get to sit down with you. Obviously, I know your story is a great one, and I know you've seen a lot of success, so I look forward to having our guests enjoy your story, and let's have some fun.
Awesome. Looking forward.
So what do we need to know? Let's take it back a little bit. We don't need to do the whole story, but what do we need to know about the upbringing of Jeff Douglas, where you're from, a little bit of the background that led you to kind of do what you do today in the way you do it today, and kind of how you handle things?
Sure. So I think that actually you and I have a lot of similarity here in that, you know, I know how close you were with your father and you got to work with your father, and he was your biggest inspiration. So the same is true for me. So my father is a labor arbitrator, and I'm an employment lawyer. So I kind of went down this path because of him. You know, at dinner every night, we would sit down 6 o'clock, and my dad would tell my sister and me the fact pattern from his case that day, and we had to try to figure out what was the right answer. So this went on for 12 years, and so when it came time to go to college, I ended up going to Cornell, majored in industrial and labor relations, just like he did. And so I kind of went down the same path, but then instead of being a neutral, I decided I like representing companies.
First of all, interesting you say arbitrators are neutral. We'll leave that. That's neither here nor there.
He is.
He thinks he's neutral. It's interesting because I don't get to talk about this a lot, but it is true that my father was my mentor. But it's interesting because I rarely get to talk about the fact that part of the inspiration for my career was, I don't want to say it was a self-conscious thing, but it's like being an insurance agent is not cool. I assume being a labor arbitrator is not, I assume that's not particularly cool. But when you're a kid and you want to go into a profession that's not like cool-ish, I mean, I guess being a lawyer is cooler than being an insurance agent. I find that you kind of have to explain, you know what I'm saying? You constantly
totally.
are like explaining yourself.
Yeah, so it's funny for me. I always tell to people, oh, do you like being a lawyer? No, I actually don't like being a lawyer, but I love being a labor and employment lawyer. And for me, there's a big difference because growing up, I got to hear all these stories. Think about it this way. Other than with your family, and maybe even more so than with your family, who do you spend the most time with? Where do you spend the most time? It's at work. And crazy stuff happens at work, right? A lot of days are mundane and you go through the same thing, but I get to hear crazy stories about what happens at work.
No, nobody calls their labor attorney and says, by the way, we just had a great meeting. Everybody said kumbaya and everyone loves each other.
Exactly. I don't even, based on my experience and my phone calls, I don't think that ever happens.
Did you know that going in? Did you know how crazy the world, the ins and outs? I feel like we read some of these stories in the news, and obviously news media is news media, but I feel like some people are like, that's impossible. There's no way. You see the movie Wolf of Wall Street, and you're like, there's no way that there was a company that was run like that.
There for sure was, and it's shocking to say this, but there still are. I've seen crazy stuff. But I even remember, I must have been in elementary school, and I remember one of the cases my dad told me about. It was some public school teacher, for discipline or something, made second grade students crawl up and down a hallway. And
we definitely didn't have that in school.
Yeah.
I can say that.
And the teacher got brought up on charges, and I was like, I can't believe that happened, And every day was like that. Now, a lot of days there were, boring contract interpretation cases, but I remember that, and I was like, oh, that's interesting. I get to learn about what people do all day.
It's so crazy you say that because I think my siblings will verify this. Again, being an insurance agent or being the child of an insurance agent, I assume similar to being the child of a labor arbitrator. Mm-hmm. It would have been cooler if my father was a sports agent. I assume, right? If he was the doctor for the Jets. I assume that probably would have been much cooler. But we always heard and felt like we were in on really cool stuff. Like
Yeah.
similar to you, we managed claims for physicians and their insurance for 35 years. And there are times when I remember saying as a kid, and even when I started working here, like, there's no way that doctor did that. Or there's no way that you could get sued for this. We had a case where a physician did a wrong side surgery, arthroscopic surgery on the knee, and there were two or three things that shocked me after that. One was he closed the knee up, and when the lady woke up, he said to her, things got messed up in the file. I operated on the wrong knee, but boy, are you lucky that I opened up your left knee, because what we found in there was incredible.
Yeah.
So that was part one. And part two was, the crazy part was, she was only upset about one thing, and that was that she had to have another surgery. She was like, you should have just done the left,
two birds,
done the
know?
right. We didn't have authorization, but then you're thinking, like, how is it possible that a seasoned physician signed the wrong knee, and nobody on the staff said? But I'm assuming companies it's also like that. How is it possible that you have 100 employees or 1,000 employees and nobody told the boss or told their supervisor this is a bad idea?
Look, I've had that happen. Look, unfortunately, I see a lot of sexual harassment cases. I had it happen where an employee complained to, I guess, HR, saying someone was harassing her. The supervisor comes back and says, actually, we've been in a consensual relationship for 2 years, and no one knew about it, or even the few people who did, no one said, like, hey, maybe I should tell HR that, like, this is going on,
Do you find that that's happening less now, though? Like, people feel more comfortable or open to speaking up?
Yeah, it's funny. I think that definitely in light of MeToo, people, number one, feel more comfortable speaking up, and number two, I think people in general are more cognizant of their behavior, and so borderline behavior that may have occurred before MeToo that would have been sexual harassment is not happening as much. The big thing for me is before the pandemic, I saw so much sexual harassment and really some of the really awful claims. I mean, I've been in cases that are just devastating, and I represent the companies. But I would say after the pandemic, because of remote work, there's a lot less.
This wasn't where I was going with this interview, but I'm all honest. Well, two things. I find, correct me if I'm wrong, but sometimes you like look at a company or look at a CEO and you're like, this is a train wreck. These guys, and then somehow they never end up getting sued. That's remarkable to me.
I thought that could happen, but everyone gets sued now. So it's not a question of if, it's a question of when. Even if you're the greatest company in the world, and so I'm going to do a good pitch for your business, employment practices liability insurance. Every company needs it because you could be the best company in the world. You're still going to get a frivolous lawsuit at some point.
So I guess it's when and at what scale, probably.
Exactly.
Right?
So scale is critical. And I think that's where, look, if you're running your company terribly, treating your employees terribly, it's bound to happen. I mean, I can tell you this. I fired clients before because I didn't like the way they were treating their employees.
And that was just bad business all around. Even though it probably would have been good business for you, right?
It would have been great business.
Recurring revenue of people constantly getting sued.
100%. But I had to put my foot down and say, you can't treat people like this. And also ethically, I'm not going to write a contract for you that blatantly violates the law.
I hear that 100%. But,
yeah.
but I guess we're giving human being and humankind too much credit. But
Yes.
I am still shocked by that. Again, you could say that there's a situation where one person thinks that something's consensual, one person thinks that something's not, one person thought that something was a joke, one person thought that something was not. It was a bunch of guys in the guys club in a room and the woman.
The banter.
I could get to all of that.
Yep.
But like sometimes you see things and you're like, who thought that was a good idea? Like
some people don't care.
So I want to get back to your career.
Yeah.
Well, this is okay. We can spend all day on this. I want to get back to so it's interesting because I didn't know that when you went to law school, I guess you kind of knew what area of law you wanted to do. And that's super rare because most of the time what I've heard from people who know what they want to do when they go to law school is one of two things. Either they want to go into a business afterwards and therefore they're going to get a law degree because that's good for that's good business sense. And therefore, if they know that they want to go into real estate, if they want to know something about real estate law, they'll do that.
Yep.
Or had I gone to law school, I probably would have done something about insurance or claim work or things like that. It's interesting that I assume that when you get to law school, there's a lot of general classes, but then it's also like people are probably sitting around saying, I wonder what I want to do with my life. And you're like,
so, it's
and
funny.
and people are probably like, you didn't say tech startups or something?
Yeah.
Like,
So it's funny because, when I went to college, one of the reasons I went to Cornell was Cornell has 3 state schools, so it's cheaper. So the School of Industrial and Labor Relations is one of the state schools.
interesting.
And so literally when you're at the School of Industrial Labor Relations, you are learning everything there is to know about work. So you take labor and employment classes, labor history. I could tell you all about, 19th century labor history and foundation of unions and this and that. And
Super irrelevant.
My friends and I have a joke. We're like, textile workers in Lowell, Massachusetts, in 1820.
Coal mines.
Like, exactly, coal mines, all that kind of stuff. So we had to take that stuff. We had to take organizational psychology. We had to take HR classes, labor economics. So, we really got to learn everything there is to know about work. And I loved it while I was there. But I have other interests, too. I happen to love history. So after 4 years of that, I thought I was going to be a labor and employment lawyer. And I was like, what would be great? Art law. That seems really cool because I can use history and all that stuff. And then I took one tax class in law school and I was like, no, I'm going to be a labor and employment lawyer,
And I'm guessing that when you then apply for a job or summer internships, when you kind of know what you want to do in a very specialized field, that's probably, from a recruiting standpoint, an advantage.
So in theory, yes, an advantage, except when you graduate from law school in 2011. So I started law school in the fall of 2008, and I went to Fordham, and I remember we were sitting in the atrium, all the new 1Ls, and we're like, this is going to be awesome. We're going to work hard for 1 year. We're all going to get jobs at big law firms, and then for the next 2 years, we're not going to do anything, and we're going to make a lot of money. And then Lehman Brothers crashed. And I remember I had 2 friends from college who were working at Lehman. And the joke with them was they had made all this money the summer before and we didn't have anything. And literally the second week they lost their jobs. And the entire economy crashed and there were no jobs. So the trickle down hit law a little later. And so when I graduated from law school, there were no jobs. My first job out of law school was basically working for free for the Nassau County Office of Labor Relations.
Wow, it's interesting because you don't think about the trickle-down effect in all these things post-pandemic.
Yep.
We're talking, in the end of 2023, early 2024, there's talks about a recession and things like that.
Yeah.
I guess a lot of people think about... That's interesting because, as I'm putting this together, a lot of people now are talking about how they have to pivot their careers.
Yep.
Like if you are a real estate agent or a loan officer, you're talking about how people are not refinancing their loans because the interest rates are so high. So you're thinking about pivoting your career. I guess with your experience, you're thinking, and everyone should think, how do I pivot in any job, which now, beginning of a recession, quote unquote, or if there is one, might be safe, but then punt that ball down the road 6 months from now.
Yeah. Or the other way to look at it is to say, okay, what's my goal? Maybe I thought there was only one path to get there. What's the other path? What are the other roads that get me to my goal? I knew my goal was to be a partner at a law firm with my own labor and employment practice. And, when I graduated law school in 2011 without a job, it was well, how am I going to get there? So I became a plaintiff's attorney. I never thought I was going to represent employees, So for 2 years...
Savage.
Yeah, for 2 years I was a plaintiff's attorney. And you know what? Great experience because I got to litigate. I got to do work that I never would have gotten to do at a big firm. I got to see how plaintiff's attorneys think. And then I switched to the management side and I had great insight. And that insight is still helpful with clients.
So my father used to say that it's always good to try to sit on the other side of the table in any negotiation.
Yeah.
I guess you literally sat on the other side of the table, so that works. So you knew what you wanted to do, which is an interesting, people always say, I guess that's easier, but I'm not sure because I think that, in this podcast, we're talking about hustling and pushing through the times that somewhat might seem difficult. I assume, as it has been for me, but correct me if I'm wrong, that when you know what you want to do early on, there's a different level of doubt. You doubt things. It's easier to doubt your career choice because you've always thought about it.
Yeah.
It's like I'm sure like you sit in certain communities, you're like, I should have got into real estate. And then the past year happens, you're like, not a bad gig. But coming out of law school, super specialized and super focused.
Yep. Yeah, there was definitely doubt. I remember I went to meet with a legal recruiter. I think this is also important about knowing your own value, and your own self-worth, basically. And I hope this doesn't come across as a conceited comment, but I remember I met with a legal recruiter who told me that I'd already passed the bar at this point. I was admitted to practice in New York and New Jersey at this point, and goes, you should consider being a paralegal. And I'm thinking, why would I do that? And look, being a paralegal is a great gig, but I just went to school for 7 years.
To law school for 7 years and passed the bar twice.
Exactly right. And I'm thinking, why would I do that? And it was along the path being able to say, no, I know where I want to be. This isn't the right way to get there. And sometimes having to say, no, I'm not going to do that. It may be the easy thing right now because it helps me do whatever I need to do. But it was always keeping my eyes on where I wanted to be.
Did they try to convince you that wouldn't stunt your growth?
Yeah. I mean, it was little things it was, doing doc review, and I had to make decisions. For example, I would have made nice money doing doc review for a few years, for a few months. But long term, it was better to go work at the Nassau County Office of Labor Relations, basically for free. And look, thank God I was in a position at the time. I was living at my parents' house at 25 years old, which was not great. But honestly, some of the experience I got in those 6 months at the Nassau County Office of Labor Relations has been huge for me. I got to meet all these arbitrators. I got to meet other attorneys. I got to first chair arbitrations, things that I wouldn't get to do for another 5-6 years once I got into private practice.
So you kept hustling through it.
Yeah.
Meaning, I have to believe that you didn't. It's not like you chose, not to go back to something we discussed before, but it's not like you chose coal mining and coal mines were law and that would
exactly.
disappear. I assume you had to believe that there was going to be a rebound, and therefore employment would rebound, and therefore the need for employment law would rebound. It wasn't like people were telling you this industry is going to disappear.
100%.
It was, are you willing to be patient enough for it to rebound?
So what ended up happening at that point was every single labor and employment law posting I saw was minimum 2 to 4 years of experience.
I love that.
So
I love when people ask for 2 to 4 years of experience.
Right. So the question I kept asking myself was, well, there's one thing I can't control, right? And that's time. I can't stop time, give myself the 2 years of experience that all these firms are asking for. So I figured, well, what can I do to bolster my experience, and get to that point where, once I hit 2 years, I've done all of this stuff that's now really marketable to these law firms. And so it was, working for free basically, at the Office of Labor Relations, because then I could say, I've handled mediations. I first chaired an arbitration. I've appeared in front of administrative proceedings. I've, gone down to the union office and negotiated grievances.
So then I guess there was a rebound, or maybe not. What was, looking back, you've been practicing law now how long?
12 years.
12 years. There has to be a pivotal moment that gets everyone to where they are. Very often it's what crystallized either what they were doing was right and correct and they should stay the course, or sometimes it's the opposite, that they should make a pivot. If you had to think back to a pivotal moment where you said, this is the moment that the wall's in front of me, but if I hustled through this wall, I will get to where I want to be, take us back to that moment.
Yeah, so I think there are a few moments. I mean, I definitely know the moment where that first phase of my career, that having to hustle through, I don't want to say adversity, because it's not really adversity as much as it's the difficult times. I think I got spoiled by the notion of, in high school, did I work as hard as I should have worked? Probably not. And I went to Cornell. In Cornell, did I work as hard as I probably should have? Maybe, maybe not. I went to Fordham, and then when I graduated from law school, it was like, oh my God, life's not so simple, So I think for me, there were two things. Number one, I picked the right wife, or she picked me. And I'm very fortunate for that because my wife happens to be the hardest working person I know. And so being married to my wife has made me a better worker. It's made me work harder, more efficient, smarter, and given me more of a drive to just really hustle, So that's definitely number one. And number two, I know the moment career-wise where it changed. And it's when I switched from being a plaintiff's attorney to an employer-side attorney because I went to a firm where I had great mentors. And even though I was only at that firm for about 2 years, when the day I made partner at my subsequent firm, my first text message was to the 2 mentors I had at that firm. And I said, thank you guys, you taught me how to be a lawyer.
I think that those two are 2 sides of the same coin. Yes, mentors are great because they have that experience, but correct me if I'm wrong. I think there's an important point here, and that is when you have people who believe in you, and I agree with you, I think that the person who we choose as our life partner my wife is the same way, and I saw it with my parents who actually worked together. That has an impact that is completely unquantifiable, and I think that people very often lose sight of the fact. People say, and it's it's buzzwords on social media, your why. My why is my kids' soccer games.
Yeah,
but that's great. Other part of your why is if my partner is doing this. I'm sitting in my office and it's 6 o'clock at night. And if I'm sitting in my office at 6 o'clock at night, that means that my wife is doing X, Y, and Z with our children after she's worked, after she's done all this. I can't not hustle.
Exactly.
If I was just going to grab takeout pizza and go sit, so I think that people lose sight of that, especially in our generation, that having people that depend on you makes you hustle not just for the dollars. It's not about the dollars. And I assume switching plaintiff side, switching the careers, looking at the dollars and cents. Sometimes it's not always linear, and you don't always make more money when you switch. But I think the second side of that coin, which is equally as important, is when there are mentors that invest in us. The same thing. We feel that we need to hustle for them as well. 100%. Not that we don't want to let them down, but it's like, you didn't have to take that extra hour in your day. Right. And when you did, when I wanted to give up, I hustled through that.
100%. And also, even with mentors, it's about recognizing where criticism comes from too, right?
Spouses.
Like spouses too, yeah. And look, the 2 mentors that I had who were really, first of all, amazing attorneys, great people, they were not, your lovey-dovey type of mentors. They were tough.
Talk about employment law. But
No, but they were great. And at times I thought, why are they criticizing me for this? What do they care about this? And then as I grew, and now I have associates working for me, I've learned that all the criticisms that they had were teaching opportunities, and they were invested in me. I had one partner who I worked for, one of my 2 mentors, for, I think, I remember my son wasn't even a year old at the time, and there were like 6 or 7 Sundays in a row where my mentor was like, you're coming into the office. And I was like, well, that stinks. But you know what he did? He was preparing me to take my first depositions on the management side. He taught me how to he took his time out of his life to teach me how to take depositions.
I think also probably the fact that he was there.
Yeah.
It wasn't, you're going to come in, read through these docs on a Sunday,
Correct.
And then we'll talk about it on Monday. And I think that there's a real art to mentorship. And I think that one of the things that I've tried when people call me for advice and things like that, and what I think I learned from my father was that, my father, should rest in peace, was that my father, I never felt, and obviously it's different when it's a parent and a child, so I never felt like he didn't want me to succeed. And I think that people very often either don't verbalize that or the mentee doesn't feel that. Mm-hmm. And so therefore it becomes difficult to be the mentee. But in the end of the day, it's like, if you have a coach, if you want to be a great tennis player, you want to be a great golf player, if you want to be a great golfer, mm-hmm. and somehow you get Tiger Woods to be your coach, anything that he tells you, you're going to do.
100%.
If he tells you that you need to stand on one foot, you're going to be like, what does that do with the golf swing?
I'm going to do it.
Dude, you're Tiger Woods. Like, you've made billions of dollars and you're the greatest golfer to ever live.
Yep.
So I think that very often people don't come off that early, meaning, and it probably also plays into employment law. I think that if people don't state, it has to be stated. It has to be, you can't just assume that it's going to be understood.
Yep.
I think it's understood in a marriage, right? I think that in a family life,
that the goal is we want to collectively succeed.
And I want you to succeed because I love you.
Right.
I would assume it's hard for employers to get over to their employees. I love you and I want you to succeed. And I think it's super interesting that you felt that, because for me, obviously, it was my parents. So
yeah,
it's really easy to know that your parents want you to succeed. And when they're telling you to do something, sometimes it was because I think that they wanted me to feel what it was like to not be the child of the
right.
CEO, which I totally get. But I never, like, even when we had, and there were some difficult times. I say if you can get through the first 5 years in a family business, you're good. But those 5 years are tough. I never felt like, oh, they want me to fail.
Right.
And I feel like the fact that you were able to then look back later, and that was your first, probably your wife and them, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
like
totally.
That, even though you weren't working with them or for them then, they were probably like, wow, those 10 years, 5 years, 2 years, 1 year, those 7 Sundays.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah, it's interesting.
And then by the time, sorry to not interrupt, but the point I wanted you to address is it was probably rewarding for them too. When they get that text, they're like, wow, those Sundays are worth it for me too, not just for Jeff.
Yeah. And it's funny. I guess I hadn't spoken to either of them in a few years. And because of that text.
Really?
Yeah. And I don't know, just, life happens. Right. And I guess also the pandemic happened. So we didn't talk for a little while. But since that text, we've kind of renewed a friendship now, but more as peers as opposed to like mentor-mentee. So much that one of them's been trying to get me to go back, but I'm not.
Is that no one has brought that up yet? Is it weird or strange when you go from mentee to peer? How does that work?
You know what? I don't know because I wasn't there. And it's funny because
you're saying right. It would have been even more interesting if you made partner in that firm.
Correct. So it's funny. Even at the firm I was at for a bunch of years after that, where I did make partner. It was natural, it was, I started as a senior associate.
But I guess you didn't start as an intern.
Correct. It just becomes natural. Like, okay, we're partners, and we're peers. It just becomes
I don't know if I buy that.
So I think goes back to something I was going to say, which is, when we were talking about, the notion of, does a mentor want the mentee to succeed, right? That's about culture. That's about culture of the workplace, because I've seen so many different workplace cultures. I've seen some pretty bad ones. I've seen pretty hostile stuff. Not in the legal sense of hostile, but just from like an organizational psychology perspective, like just bad environments, what we call a toxic workplace. And then I've seen others where they're just amazing. And it's about communication. It's about, does the mentor tell the mentee, hey, I'm not doing this to be a jerk? Because but you work for your dad, so it's different.
No, but same, the guy coming in on Sunday, you coming in on Sunday. Yeah, I don't want you to not be with your son on a Sunday.
Correct. But people have had jerks as bosses, right? It's the question, are you a boss or a leader? I'm not one for all this corporate talk, but there's a real distinction between a boss and a leader. A boss is the person who's going to be a jerk to you and just criticize you for the sake of criticizing you. A leader is someone who's criticizing you, but in a way that gets you to grow and gets the best out of you.
I assume that this is the case, but again, correct me if I'm wrong. In the companies that you've worked with, I assume that the good ones, you've seen those employee successes, the people that stay long-term over and over, and then you can see the pattern of how is it that there has never been a person that has started at the bottom of this company and made it to the C-suite? Mm-hmm. Obviously, there's some sort of fall off because not everyone can make it there.
Right.
Excuse me, but I guess I'm assuming that there's some where it's like, oh, this company, the way they run is, you may not get to be the owner, but
do good work
and they build a culture and they find the winners, and obviously not everyone's made for that.
100%.
But I can bet that the next manager is going to come internal rather than external.
Yeah.
And some you're like, the only way they're going to get a manager is by hiring from outside.
And look, there are a lot of companies that say, 95% of the time we're promoting from within. Now, it's good to bring people in from the outside because otherwise you get this group shift and other aspects where you don't get an outside perspective, and that's not healthy for an organization either. But for the most part, when you have, a self-proclaimed ethos of, we promote from within, it helps, because people can see, I'm going to grow here. I can be here for a long time. Something with our generation for sure is that People jump around from place to place. I think it's very rare where someone says, I'm going to start my career here and I'm going to end my career here. Unless you're in a family business.
Right. But I think that what you do see with the good leaders is very often people come back.
Yes.
I think that some people feel like that in order to further their career, and a part of it, it's kind of like I see it in the insurance industry. I'm very close with the senior manager at one of the insurance companies, and I've literally seen where people have left, and everybody at the company is like, he'll be back, she'll be back. Meaning, like, okay, in order to get this company doesn't see you as a fit for a managerial role, the next step, they're not going to match the offer. You're going to go there, but but your mentor is still here. Correct. Therefore, and that's the kind of relationship we have. That therefore they're kind of bringing it back. Right. Or like you want to be a CFO. There's an existing CFO, but like everybody knows that Jeff is coming back 100% to this company because he's the guy.
Yeah, and that's part of the thing of like when you're the mentor mentee, sometimes it's hard to grow as the mentee into being a peer. Sometimes you have to go somewhere else first, grow a little bit on your own, then come back, and you're looked at more as a peer.
Do you think that there are still companies that exist that in their you mentioned it, that in their very ethos, they're like, we want you to start and end your career here?
It's funny. I don't know if it's a company thing or an employee thing. I think there are very few. I've not really seen it. I think law firms can have it sometimes. Some of the big firms can have it. But it's very rare. I can tell you, of my friends from college, law school, I have one friend who's been at the same firm for the last 12 years.
I'm going to disagree with you on this. I don't think that's a mentor-mentee thing. I don't think that's an ethos of leadership. I think that's the easiest way to get to the easiest way for me to just plug along at a big law firm is to stick it out.
That's true. Yeah.
I don't think it's wrong
about that. He left for 2 weeks. He left for 2 weeks to go to a different law firm, hated it, went back, and they were like, we would love to have you back.
But was that because he missed his mentors, or because he just loved
he was just like, I've been here for 6 years, like maybe.
But I'm saying coming back, he liked the comfort. So it wasn't a
I don't know if it was a mentor-mentee thing.
I think that if you take startups out, where employee number 2 may stick it out, until the company goes public, let's say, I think it's almost impossible nowadays.
Yeah.
It's just let's take 2 things out: startups where people build a startup with the founder, and family businesses. Let's because family businesses, it's just not fair. Yep. If you leave, you're never coming back. I don't want to say never, but it's rare. So if you take those 2 things out,
I think it's also a financial thing. I think people feel that they can get those significant jumps in salary by going somewhere else.
So shouldn't employers try to get ahead of that?
Yeah, they should. And it's interesting now in New York City, for example, there's number one, you're not allowed to ask prospective hires about what their salary was at other places. And employers, when they have a job posting, they have to post a salary range, a reasonable salary range for what this job is going to be. And the whole point is like to try to create more transparency. So, Gordon companies can look and see, well, our competitor, whoever that may be, is hiring for this position at this salary range. Wow, we're either way above market or we're way below market, whatever it may be. That might have a way of preventing employees from jumping ship to go somewhere else.
Because they can then see, it's not really, it's really a very small jump, not a.
Because you see it a lot of times, employees will say, okay, I'm going to go interview at that other job. I'm going to get that offer. And then I'm going to go back to my employer and say, well, I just got this offer for $40,000 more. Will you match that? But then it's, well, why are you only giving me this raise that you may think I'm worth because I may leave? It's a real question. Well, it's economics, but
I think I as a person who has stepped a little bit into that role, anyone who could master the economics of employee, this is going to sound wrong, but worth, meaning what is the appropriate, there are people who pay well below market. There are people that pay well above market. I'm not sure. It's impossible.
It's nearly impossible. Look, in the legal industry, for example, there's kind of a rule of thumb as to how compensation works, which is a third, a third, a third. So this is for associates, You basically have to, as an associate, generate in revenue 3 times your salary. The first third covers your salary, the second third covers overhead, and the third is partner profit. And so you kind of have a general sense of what someone's worth.
But then the partner has to back into that number. But it's
correct.
But then it's like, okay, this person says they're going to leave. Does that mean they're worth more or not? And then you get into a really complicated thing, and this is not a rabbit hole I was planning on going down, but I love it, is like, is it worth it for me to pay more than I know I should just to avoid hassle? And that I think is the worst position for an employer to be in.
It's the worst position. And, the other one we get is, I'm now going to have to train someone. There's going to be ramp up time. Yeah, it's a tough position for an employer to be in.
Dude, I could talk to you all day. Your journey. I love the fact that you stuck it out in a very specialized place, in a very specialized industry, doing crazy, amazing things. I'm proud to at least get coffee every once in a while. I'll hear about the journey. Thank you for coming in. We have a closing tradition on this podcast that we ask our guests to leave us with their favorite or current inspirational quote. Before we got on, you told me that there is one quote that you live by. So what I'm going to say is not your favorite inspirational quote, but we want to know the quote that Jeff Douglas lived by.
So it's fun. I don't know if I personally live by this. I actually don't think I live by this quote, but it's a quote that's helped me to understand people and especially my clients. It's not necessarily a positive quote about people, but unfortunately, I think it's helped me to understand what my clients are trying to do, and also try to do things to prevent people from doing this too. Which is, I'm a huge Bruce Springsteen fan, and there was always a quote that stood out to me. And it's, "Poor men want to be rich, rich men want to be king. King ain't satisfied till he rules everything." And I think it's essentially saying, like, well, this is, the rational economic player that we have in economics, right? It's that every decision that is made by people is driven by money and trying to capture as much money as possible. And while I do have clients who are like that, and I think that there are plaintiffs who are like that, I've been pleasantly surprised along the way to know that that quote is not actually true. And people do a lot of good things that are not driven by power and, the need to have as much money as possible. People are actually driven in a lot of instances by doing what they think is just the right thing. And I'm really grateful that my clients are people who are not looking to rule everything. They're looking to treat their employees well, even if it means taking, less money home for them. They're willing to help that employee who, God forbid, has cancer and can't work, and they have every legal right to fire that person because the person's been out of work for a year, and they don't do it because they don't want that person to lose their health insurance. And so, it's a quote that's always stood out to me that I'm really happy to know is not actually true.
I love that. And I wish that we heard more of that. And that's part of the goal of this podcast, is to learn about people's hustle. And I think when you learn what really drives people and ultimately why they do what they do and how, even if they've never concretized before, I think hopefully we see a lot more good in people. And I hope that that's one of the positive things that comes out of our generation. Jeff, thank you for being here.
Aaron, thanks for having me. This is great.
This has been another episode of Keep Hustling. Remember, do well by doing good, and always keep hustling. All right, hustlers, that brings us to the end of another fantastic episode. Thank you for listening. Be sure to subscribe to our podcast so you never miss an episode. If you have any suggestions, comments, or even just want to say hello, please feel free to reach out to us on all social media platforms. We are Keep Hustling Pod. Until next time, stay curious, stay hungry, and keep hustling.